I was born in Hong Kong. I guess, well, it was introduced to me because we're just surrounded by buildings, right? And and Norman Foster's Hong Kong Bank was being built around the time,
Oh,
I
cool.
guess, in my formative years. So that was interesting to see that. And there was something different from all the other buildings around Hong Kong, which are kind of crap.
Were you living? I've not been to Hong Kong. I've studied it from an urban design perspective, but
Okay.
I've been there.
Hmm.
So, when you were a kid, were you experiencing like the center of the city as opposed to kind of maybe on the periphery or the outskirts? I'm not quite sure how the city's laid out.
Uh, yeah, most people live in the city. I mean, it's pretty urbanized anyway. Having said that, Hong Kong actually has a lot of areas that is national parks.
Hmm.
That's a treat when you go out there.
Yeah.
But usually you're just in the urban areas.
And so, what prompted you then to study architecture? Did someone tell you it was a good idea? Did you have an architect relative, or?
No, I have no one in the family. I guess it was a it was a case of elimination. It's like, well, I didn't want to do accounting or law or medicine, the usual
Yeah.
parts, and okay, well, what can I do? What do I want? So it was engineering and architecture, and of course, I did not know the difference between engineering and architecture, as most sort of young people or lay people kind of they can't really tell the difference. And
Hmm.
I went and had a work experience in year 10 to an engineering firm, and it was middle of the recession, and they just said, do not do engineering. And all I was doing was just designing slabs, or at least drawing up concrete slabs.
Wow.
So I realized, okay, that's not for me. So architecture was.
Interesting. When you got to architecture school, was it more conceptual or creative than maybe you thought it was going to be?
Um, it was more conceptual than I expected, which is great. There's a lot of philosophy and information that I was interested in anyway. So that all led to my interest
Hmm.
building. Originally, I went to architecture school thinking I was going to do heritage.
Oh,
I was going
interesting.
to do classical buildings and stuff because I like, the beautiful stuff.
Hmm.
And I learned pretty quickly that there's a whole world of architecture that again, most people don't know about. In sort of modern movement onwards, there's actually a lot of good stuff.
Hmm.
And yeah, that changed me pretty quickly.
It's interesting because the schools that I've been exposed to, they don't really teach how to produce classical or traditional architecture.
Oh no, they don't.
Yeah. I'm sure it was
Yeah,
the same
but
case.
I went into architecture school thinking that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's architecture, isn't it? That's what people think architecture is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's totally true, though, right? That is what most people think, and for sure, I think a lot of students, or new students who go to architecture school, they expect to learn, maybe some engineering. They expect to learn how buildings are built. They expect to learn how to draw up things that you see in history books and whatnot. And then for a lot of the schools, it's like the complete the complete opposite. In the early years, it's very abstract. It's conceptual. It's weird, and you're doing, depending on what era, the decon type of architecture, it's like very different from.
Yeah, that's my era.
Is it?
Yeah.
But so once you got into architecture school and you weren't designing classical type buildings, you were still hooked by the new stuff. You found it engaging.
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good teacher, whom subsequently I traveled with in my year out. The first weeks, I think it was like third week into architecture school, we had a design lecture. It was a 3-hour lecture on Ronchamp.
Wow.
He had 2 hours of it, and then he said he needs a break. And then anyone else interested, we can come back and continue. We all went back. So we had sort of deep dive into, this really good explanation through design, not the history subject, but actually design being taught about how to see and learn from buildings. So that got me hooked pretty quickly.
Ronchamp was one of my favorite buildings. I'm super curious if you remember, what were some of the things that were covered during that 3-hour lecture?
From the procession, how you see it from down the hill, and then going up. And of course, how you would approach it, different ways, the 3 different ways you would use the building as a pilgrim as you go around, as a Sunday crowd where you go through the big swinging door, and then as a much larger crowd that, use the outdoor space on the pyramid or near the pyramid, looking back at the building.
Mm-hmm.
Amongst other things, of course, even the paving patterns and the way that it's orientated, and the abstraction, the composition, the windows, all that stuff.
That's really cool. To be honest, I don't think that sounds like a really interesting lecture, not just because of Ronchamp, but just the format of it itself. And I don't think I ever had a class where there was such an intense breakdown of a building, and for that long, for sure. But thinking about it, I guess the difference is the lecturer was a traveler. He is a traveler. So, instead of the usual story, you'll find a picture now, and just any picture, and usually back in the day, there were slides. There were like some funny slides either taken from a book, or someone have taken 1 or 2 photos and they've used that in their slide carousel when they talk about it. But he had lots because he travels. He used to take tours there, so he had lots to talk about. So there were photos of things that were telling a story rather than just, here's a picture of Ronchamp and here's a plan. Yeah,
gotcha. That's kind of usually the usual story, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's not an easy building to get to either.
No.
So you complete architecture school and you practice for a bit, but it seems like your professional career has been a mixture of practicing and also teaching. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in fact, I changed university as well. Hang on, my camera the video just go out?
Yeah, the video went out, but we can still hear
okay.
you. Let's see if we can get it back.
Where were we? So going back, I changed university as well. The university I studied at was Sydney University, and then I moved to Melbourne, which is where I live now. And just a change of university in different cities, that was quite important, I think. And then the change was important because it was such a social environment. The first school I went to at Sydney University, there was such a camaraderie, much smaller school. And, we used to run social events, drinks, and we'll drag the tutors and lecturers to these events. To the point that we get them so well. So some of them we even invited to our house parties. So that was normal for me. And then having moved from there to Melbourne University, that was very, very different. The students do not talk to teachers outside of studio, class time, basically. So they were mortified when the first week I struck up a conversation with my tutor, and he came over and brought us drinks. They were mortified. So I saw that as a problem in education straight away. And that pretty much led me into teaching as well, because I believe that's missing a component. Instead of just teaching the syllabus and whatever it's being taught, I think the social engineering side of things, it's important, and that's pretty much underlines everything I do.
Interesting. Can you expand on that? So the issues or the challenges you saw once you got to Melbourne was that, I mean, I don't know, were the teachers were just not social or? Yeah,
they were just treated, and I don't know, I keep using the term kindergarten students. I feel like they were treated in a certain way, and then they also don't react a certain way, as opposed to just like, it's just another human being. We can go and have a chat, have a drink. I found that was limiting. And then I realized, back in Sydney University days, the studio time when you actually do and talk about your design, which is only a few minutes you get to talk about, you don't learn much. You learn a lot through just social conversations. You learn about the world, you learn about other things that linked to architecture. And that was missing, I think.
I gotcha. So the types of communications being very formal and very kind of restricted to set times in the day and set formats was not allowing for this other aspect of education, which kind of happens, I suppose, in a way, sort of like by the water cooler in a certain sense.
Yeah, yeah. There's that, as well as also just being free to express yourself and talk freely, as opposed to, just yes, yes, yes.
Gotcha. Do you think that type of that way of educating is also more common with all schools X decades ago, and it's evolved over time, as opposed to it being one university versus another university?
I'm seeing, in some ways, but I'm seeing more of that now. And I think seeing the students here in the studio, that's even less. Just constant thing that I battle with them is they do not say. I say, how do you go with the design? And they said, oh, my tutor liked it. They say, don't. It's not about what they like. It's never about what they like. What do you want to do and how they can help you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But now it's just so much about they're producing exactly what they want, as opposed to being free thinking and opening up conversations. It's not conversations.
I like that point, and I find it really interesting. I taught architecture off and on for a period of time, so I have a natural interest in this type of conversation. But also, so one of my theories regarding what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that some of the students, actually, more and more of the students, I think in the last 10, 15 years, have been sort of programmed to ask the tutor or the teacher, tell me exactly what I need to do, and then I'll do that. And then when I do that, are you going to give me a gold star and are we good and we can move on? And I think that mentality comes from, at least in the United States, I don't know what it's like in other countries, in the United States, in high school and in junior high and even like elementary school now, you're trained you have to get A's on everything. And the way you get an A in the class is to know precisely what you need to do to get an A. And then you do those things, you have an A, then you have a 4.0 or a 5.0, and then you're good. And that it trains a person to think that way. It's kind of like, tell me what dots I need to connect and I'll just do that. And then I pass, right? And I feel like that bleeds over into, college or university.
Definitely. I think the pedagogy at schools are different with a different generation, where back in the day, you can just get, it's 100%, here's a project, you get 100% at the end, as opposed to now it's going to be broken up into all these different steps. Each one's an assessment. Each one has and you have to spell exactly what needs to be done, exactly how to be done. So there's not much kind of freer thinking. They're just kicking goals, step by step. It's very, very spoon-fed.
Spoon-fed, yeah. And I think your point about breaking it down is also, I've seen that as well. And it kind of, look, I'm not a full-time teacher, so what do I know? But in the times where I've seen that, it's driving me nuts. I'm like, I thought.
But that's what academia is now, unfortunately. It's
really
become that.
Is that because?
So at least the ones I have seen.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that as well. Is that because? I don't know. I suppose the parents are more involved these days, even with college students, that everyone wants to know. Like, for example, if a student does not get an A or whatever mark they expect, they need to be told exactly why. Otherwise, the teacher themselves is held accountable because they didn't let the student know that these were the 10 steps to take to, get a good grade.
Well, the university is making it that way. I mean, architecture education is very different, as you know, from other forms of education. And, so I think the university apply a sort of blanket model of education throughout. So that's just the bureaucracy that has to be followed, because students will complain and say, I don't know exactly why I, didn't do well and, whatever. And you have to make the steps so that there's a sort of safety net to fall back on. It's a very expensive education, unfortunately. And, back in the day, it's kind of, I'd say part of the problem, if you don't know why you went bad, that's probably why you went bad in some ways.
Sure.
But then I think that puts the that's up to the educator to explain it, and not all of them are good at doing that and making them understand how little they know, I guess.
Is college education as expensive as it is in the States?
I think it's probably more expensive in the States, but the full fee-paying students here are paying quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I know that, I just heard this recently, there's a lot of students from Hong Kong, for example, are coming to Australia more than the States and the UK now, because it just turned out to be so expensive in the States now.
Interesting.
Compared to Australia. I mean, Australia's expensive, but if you look at the top most expensive cities to live, half of them are, not half of them, but there's quite a few of them in the top 10 in Australia. It's all around the Pacific Rim, by the way. It's quite interesting.
Oh, interesting.
So San Francisco and LA are part of that equation.
Yeah. So, so it seemed like from even your school days, you had an interest in education. I mean, being on the other side of it and being a teacher. I'm also wondering, is there a favorite studio of yours? Do you like teaching first years, second years, fourth years, graduate students?
Good question. Third year onwards, I think third year onwards, and then fourth and fifth year, which is called masters here now, but
Gotcha.
I still call it fourth and fifth year. I think second half of third year, that's when some students click.
Oh, interesting.
And they start to go, oh, okay, that's what architecture is. You just have to do this and that. And I think what I offer is often a sort of critical thinking and sort of boiling it back down to very simple, fundamental things. And they find that clarity quite refreshing compared to the sort of the mess that they've been in. And they need to go out and make a mess first in order to see the clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for any first or second years and early third years, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You just need to get to that point, and there will be clarity.
and to be re-inspired, I think a lot of times, they just get so exhausted and sort of lost faith in architecture, and some of them just don't want to continue anymore. I know quite a few, and sort of rescue them and re-inspire them about what architecture kind of is.
Or do you find that at the back half of third year and fourth year years, and then beyond, I suppose, that you are able to have projects where there's a program, there's a brief, there's a site, go, and
I'm seeing that less and less now, and I think a lot of projects I'm seeing being offered. I mean, it's always a drive for, let's look at the program. It's very OMA kind of, let's look at the program. Let's look at how can we come up with a brief and fit this particular site and stuff like that, which is useful. It's I think it's super wonderful to think about what architecture can do and think about programs and things like that. But when you see that every studio and students just spend at least, I don't know, more than half a semester just trying to come up with a mediocre brief, like that's not a realistic brief, it's just a brief of, program. And then the rest the second half, it just becomes space planning. I'm just wondering where's the conversation in architecture?
Interesting.
Often. I mean, is it just about program? I'm just seeing so much of it is that sort of it's that kind of conversation about program. Even look at OMA, they do a lot of that stuff, but then they are also competent architects. They can put together building, but the putting together building part is not really talked about. I'd feel. I'm not sure that's the same.
I've seen the same thing. It's so the studios I've been exposed to, usually the program is given to the students. The only time where they have the very clear freedom to kind of invent their own is during a fifth year or thesis, let's call it.
Okay.
And there should be always kind of an interrogation of the program that's given, but I would agree that I don't know if it's always been the case. Maybe it has been, but there seems to be a fair number of projects that I've seen where their solution is basically the program. So they've outlined some kind of social issue or environmental issue or whatever.
Yeah.
For example, we have a sustainability and is kind of the big concern. Okay, so I have an urban farm. I've solved the problem. I'm like, right, but like that takes 2 seconds to write down urban farm on a plan.
Yep.
Like you got to do more than that. And that's urban farm's an easy target, but you're kind of nodding like this is the things that we see and the
all the time.
Yeah. And the like executing the building though is this just it's I also think it's hard to do. It's also harder to teach.
It is very hard to teach. Yeah.
So,
but I just feel like the fundamental skill of, okay, how do you compose the building? How do you actually deal with spaces? And a lot of these things are not understood by students. It just becomes here's a bunch of diagrams, here's a kind of program and how they work three-dimensionally, and then slap some kind of funky facade or shape, and that's pretty much it.
That's a pretty good description of a lot of things we've seen. So I guess there's two questions. One is, why is there not more focus on like the nitty-gritty designing of a building? And the second question is, I don't know what the question. I guess how do you teach that part?
Well, that's why I'm kind of not here. I mean, I'm not at universities anymore. I guess I teach the what, why, how model, which is just what are you proposing in terms of form and proposition, which takes a lot of clarity. And that's the bit that surprisingly they struggle most to trying to clarify what they're actually proposing and then why you propose that. And together, that's the concept. And then how does that work? That's pretty simple. It sounds pretty simple, but it's actually very hard to pull themselves back to go, well, yeah, what are the moves and how do I do this? If this thing and that thing is different, how do you make them different? How, if they are, part of thing about unified, so how do you unify something? It's not really explained. It's not sexy. I don't think that's probably the problem. And I think universities now also is under pressure to almost market some of the work, the pretty work, and I see that every week. The students are overproducing, like instead of spending time exploring a design and teach them skills, just tracing paper, very quick things. They spend ages on the computer and come up with one thing, and then they spend the other 70% of the time just jazzing it up to make it look Instagrammable.
Yeah.
Every week, and then they're so exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not sexy, but the why, how, and what are kind of like the three fundamental questions to any, I would say, sort of creation, right? And if you can address the three of them, or if they don't tie back together, then you're really just focusing on one, or the project just starts to fall apart because there is not those ties between them. And you're right. Like I feel like a lot of schoolwork that we see even here, the students either focus on like the why or the how or the what, but addressing those three kind of part of the argumentation of a project is more complicated, right? Because it requires more articulation than just focusing on that one thing and executing it.
Oh, but my tutor liked it.
Yeah.
No.
But it's kind of like, it's like when you're in, high school and they teach you how to write an essay, right? You have the introduction, the research, the argument, the conclusion. There is different parts to the conversation, and the project is kind of a conversation in a way, right?
Interesting thing about the writing an essay as well, I think we teach architecture in a linear manner, as if like, this is how it works. And we know design is not linear.
Yeah.
They do the site analysis and all that stuff, and they never revisit it again. Often they just throw it away. Here's an assignment, I did that. And then they go and do a design. They don't understand site analysis is something you go back to. Mm-hmm. Once you've got a design, you need to go back and almost rewrite it and go, how can I make that make sense? How can I find information to justify what I'm doing? And that's often not seen. And unfortunately, a lot of the communication, I mean, that's what we do, right? We communicate a complex design process, and we just present it as it was like, oh, this is the concept and this is what it become. Mm-hmm. And students think that is the way to go. But, it's a messy process. Yeah. You need to know, okay, there's a lot of last minute rejigging what you say it is about and, re-clarifying. It's like, well, it's no longer that, but it's now this. Let's talk about it like as if this is the starting point.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. I was recalling as you were talking about portfolios briefly, I think I read somewhere in one of your writings, I think maybe it was on your guys' website, I think you compared portfolios to Tinder profiles or something to that effect. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a dating profile.
Yeah.
And the interview is like a date.
Yeah.
Which is awkward for everyone, and is not necessarily the best representation of who you are.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, that's a problem. I think this goes back to you're talking about students, under this pressure to get a high mark. How many practices really do look at the end of the day, the marks. You look at the folio, you look at the way the soft skills that people have when they engage in the conversation. So everyone will get a piece of paper at the end, unless the really bad ones, they drop out. But otherwise, everyone's going to get a piece of paper, a degree at the end. So what makes them different? Then it's not just the work quality, because that could mean anything really, and then people have. They develop a different rate as well. But I think that the soft skills of a person as well, because I think, everything we do in architecture, everything we do really, is communication. Design's communication. Even exists in your head, it doesn't exist. It has to be drawn out, literally, onto some medium to be discussed, to communicate back to yourself, to communicate to others, to everything, to dealing with builders and councils and clients and writing letters and site meetings, everything's communication. And that's not really taught.
Yeah, I think the only time where students are tested in that regard is during presentations. But I would say, there's, for a while, I don't know if it's still the case, there was pushback against formal presentations and having critics, which I didn't understand. And then B, oftentimes there's not a lot of teachers who actually tutor the students on how to give a presentation, just an hour session.
We do.
No, you guys do. You're the rare ones, right? But otherwise it's like, pin it up and go. But no one ever talks about how to stand, how to speak, what to do, what not to do. At least from what I've seen, it's an odd thing that's missing that you're providing.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just the left field coming out. All the things I can't do in university now I'm doing. I'm trying to do, offering something else that's not there. That I think it's important part of almost like a finishing school to university that is not taught, I think.
So that's really interesting. So let's talk about that part of Archimarathon. Archimarathon Studio is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And we're definitely going to hear the story about how that all started, but let's talk about the studio portion. So what is it in a nutshell? Who's it for? How many people attend it? How does it work?
Okay. At university, back in the day, there was still physical studio space that you can work in. And of course, in the States, just seeing the actual physical studio space that everyone works in, it's just amazing to see, because we don't have that in Australia anymore.
What?
That's been completely killed off. I know it's completely killed off. Students go home. I think that's part of an interesting thing about knowing about the college culture in the United States is quite interesting as well, because I think a lot of people actually end up living on campus, and that's almost like a requirement that in dorms. That this doesn't happen here. Everyone comes in, they could be living in the suburbs, and especially since COVID, like they don't even understand why would you need to turn up to university. Wow. So they just pack up and go home.
So there's no physical studio space. My mind is blown. Of all the conversations we've had, I might be the most shocked by that statement. That's crazy.
Wait, so how does it work? Like, how do you meet do you ever meet in person as a studio anymore?
They have group projects, so they'll find space to meet. I mean, there are sort of some places to work in general. I mean, there's some desks,
gotcha.
In some communal areas, but there's no like actual studio. Everyone just, spend their living hours there as it is in the environment that I guess you guys are familiar with what the studio is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I moved to Melbourne University from Sydney because it had lock-up studio. That was the reason why I came to Melbourne. And that has been killed off completely now.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is basically a model of trying to bring back studio culture, and not only limited to one university, but it's actually right across here. I'm not sure you can see the circles.
Yep.
That's the Jean Gotzel Design Hub.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah, and that's RMIT, the school just literally across the road, and then Melbourne University's up that way, and then the three other universities, and they come here as well. So yeah, just offering a sort of co-working space, I guess. Boston Main Architects is right behind the camera, and that's their office on that side behind some glass doors that we open during the day. So how can we offer something more than just having a space for students to work at? And so it becomes a sort of semi-professional environment where they learn from osmosis, being kind of near practice. There's actually another architect who works in that corner as well. So they hear the conversations, they can get and learn from each other, learn from different universities, and learn from each other, teach them how to have that conversation, just trying to, again, social engineering, just how do you bring that all back somehow? It's a bit like selling an iPad though, like they don't really understand the value. Some do, but they're still not talking enough and learning from each other.
Interesting.
And most people, again, I just need to get a mark and I just graduate, right?
Yeah. Which, architecture is definitely the not that type of profession. First of all, so the Archimarathon Studio space is for current students, or is it also
Correct,
for people?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And how many students?
They come with their projects and at university, so they just have conversation. I mean, they work here basically, meant to be. It's a Sunday, so no one's here. But yeah, they're meant to bring the work, and everyone just check on everyone's like, hey, what you working on? And all the teaching that I cannot do back in the university days, you can just look at someone's screen and go, you've been staring at that screen for 3 hours. What exactly are you doing? What are you trying to get to? And you realize, it's just this, and everyone just goes, you just have to do that and that. It's like, done. It's a quicker way to do this. And that's missing. I mean, that's what studio should be about.
The model of kind of like mixing, I'm assuming, different students from different levels and different university within the same space is very interesting, because it feels like it will also kind of like get rid of the competition aspect of being in the same studio, in the same school. Like it's probably more of a camaraderie, like helping each other out and maybe make it more fun than if you were actually like feeling the pressure and the stress of your peer next to you, acing this project and you struggling with that white page.
It was beautiful to see. One guy from Melbourne University was presenting, and I think there were 5 students from different university, Swinburne, who went to his presentation and supported him. So that's awesome. Great to see.
That's awesome. Cool. So how many students can you have in the space?
I can have about 30 if at maximum one time, but I don't think everyone just dropping in between classes and things. Yeah. And again, they're still not getting the idea, of studio as you know it. That is, you basically live there. If you're doing university work at home or you're doing university work at university, you're missing the point. Yeah. You need to be here.
Yeah. There's a magic that happens in the studio, and there's not really a whole lot of other environments like it. There's definitely, at least when I was in school for myself, there's plenty of wasted time, but sometimes in those hours of just chatting with your friends over pizza and procrastinating, something happens, like a conversation takes place. It might not even be directly about a project, but there's just something in that mix that definitely occupies the majority of the architectural education, or a giant chunk of it,
Which goes back to the idea of just, having tutors in the mix. That I was used to, just having these conversations in a sort of informal sort of settings.
Yeah. So real quick, when you say tutor, I think I've had this conversation before with
you guys use the word professor.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because here tutor means like oftentimes someone else that's separate from the class that's hired by someone of the parents.
Sessional,
yeah.
No,
it's
it's just whoever is teaching, who's the person dealing with your studio, not the person running the subject, but the people actually physically teaching you, who's there sitting down with you and talking about your design. We call them tutors.
Okay, gotcha. So the students come to this studio space, which is great. And are you there all the time, like giving advice, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'm there most of the time. So the idea is, it's again like a practice. So you've got different levels of people and understanding. Some of the people already are quite active in helping others, and like if there's a problem, go speak to that guy. And I'm more like sort of director, like if you want me to comment on stuff, just pin me down and ask me something, and be structured about it. But yeah, I'm there most of the time.
I'm also curious.
And I've got like lots of precedents, and I'll just look at something and I'll go like, you need to look at this and whatever.
Yeah.
Or that I'll sit down with them and teach them how to draw.
Yeah. So in the context of the United States, you are actually the tutor, and the way that we would be describing it, actually.
Yeah. At the same time, we're trying to understand. We're not trying to undermine any other studios. Whatever they're doing. So we diligently read the document that they produce and say, what is the theme of the project? What are they really trying to get you to think about? And trying to have a broader sort of project manager way of looking at it and go, okay, this is the project and this is the theme of the project. What do you expect? And ask them, like, what do you expect to see at the end? If you had to sit into a crit for this project, what kind of drawings, what kind of things you expect to see? Now work towards that.
So you're kind of like
they don't have that broad thinking. They just think, I just need to produce whatever it's at the moment in time.
You're kind of like a coach, it seems like, to them, right? Like, so, you're right. Sometimes it's not very clear when, the teacher that you have in studio is saying some other things, and having someone else just kind of like guide you into understanding some of those things, I think could be very helpful. It's a very interesting model. So you guys started Archimarathon, I think, back in 2020. Is that right?
The YouTube started 2020, yeah.
And the studio,
studio started in 22.
Okay. Have you seen have you seen some evolution since you started? Like, have you changed the way it functions, or have you seen like more interest from students in like joining the studio?
There's interest, and there's still a sort of great sort of core resident group that's here. Who are really good at helping each other and helping new members. But yeah, it does feel like every semester we have to rebuild sort of that understanding, because a lot of people, when they first join, they don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal idea.
I think it's a great idea,
especially in the context of Australia or Melbourne, or where you're located. It's I can also imagine too that sometimes you'd be acting as a just almost like social support, or as a kind of therapist at times, because studio can be it's for sure challenging.
Yeah, it is. I want to say that I'm giving them psychological sort of mental health issues, but I'm aware of those things, and I'm making sure I'm just trying to help them save time and not burn out.
Yeah.
That's a problem. I think a lot of students think it's an extra thing that they come to the studio. It's an extra thing on top of what they already have to do, as opposed to thinking, no, well, we're here to strategize.
Yeah.
What you need to do. And I believe this is such an important aspect of our profession. Time is what we deal with.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we complain about. That's what we charge. And we waste a lot of it. And I think that starts at university. And we almost expect it to burn out, expect to spend all these hours on things where there are more efficient way of doing things. And I don't think that way of thinking and strategizing it's really promoted.
That is fascinating.
Have you ever thought about expanding to doing the same thing for professionals? Because I feel like there is a lot of architecture office.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Could use that as well.
Maybe, don't know. Boot camp.
Boot camp.
Like a summer boot camp or something. Yeah.
It's interesting. The not being taught or not being trained, or the discussions at least about being efficient with your time and how to manage your time is an interesting one too. This is like the pessimist in me. I suspect that a lot of times in colleges, the reason why some of these things that you're describing are not taught by the teachers, because I don't think they know how to design themselves. And it's hard to teach some of the specific things you're mentioning if you haven't done it, if you haven't gone through it and you understand yourself, the kind of traps you can fall into of wasting time or going down the wrong path for the wrong design or whatever it might be.
And pushing for perfection.
That too.
Which there isn't such thing.
Yeah.
Design is abandoned at some point. You just have to realize that you get up to a certain point, you just have to abandon and just go, right, we need to wrap this up. We need to make this as good as it can be as it stands.
Yeah.
Not this other hypothetical thing which you'll never get to.
Yeah. That was something I did not understand as a student, that's for sure. I do now because we have deadlines we have to hit.
Oh, you still don't quite understand it.
But take me back. So
I think that's the part of the idea that, having that guidance here with practitioners and myself who can offer that kind of mindset and changing the mindset of students.
Yeah, I can see where being adjacent to the professionals would also kind of bleed over. But going back, so how did Archimarathon start? Okay, well, the long story or the short story?
The long story.
The longer story is so the lecturer I mentioned early on, I went to travel with him in my year out. So in France, we started in Paris and we ended in Paris. So 26 days, France, Italy, Germany, Netherlands,
wow.
And then back to Paris. And 26 days, 66 buildings in detail. And so that was a grand tour model. So as opposed to some of the other, I'm seeing a lot of universities have these traveling studios where they go and it's really a diplomacy mission, with another university, and they get together and do some kind of design. The design themselves are never really that great, and then they don't really experience enough of the place. So this is kind of filling in what I learned, which is the grand tour model, and just travel and learn from buildings. And so I used to travel a lot, and I just ended up keep doing this in when after I left university. And time's always a limit when you are working. So and I'm trying to squeeze in as much as possible and do all the research and make sure that I just hate the fact that there's just learned afterwards when you come back that building was just around the corner. It's like, so just really just organizing hell out of my own tours for myself, and so I've done that for many years, traveling. Andrew Maynard came along in 2010 for my Germany tour. Again, it was meant to be for myself, but he came along and complained most of it. But he said, "Oh, this is like a marathon. It's an Archimarathon in the middle of a blizzard."
Oh, wow.
In Clip-On, actually. That was in the Leverance Church, Clip-On, St. Peter's. Anyway, he called it Archimarathon, and that kind of stuck in some ways. But then I've been traveling by myself. And in 2018, I decided to leave university, and I just needed to do something else. By the way, in between all that, I used to sell SketchUp. I was the Australian distributor for SketchUp for 12 years. So that paid the bills.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Architecture practice was a hobby, and teaching was therapy. And then the other thing was just paying the bills. Easy, just not much need to do. Yeah. So comes 2018, I decided I'm no longer doing SketchUp, so I needed to do something. I didn't want to practice anymore because my health just goes downhill every time it comes towards the construction phase, my health just goes downhill. I got really bad eczema, so that stresses me out.
Yeah.
And so what can I do? So I love traveling. I love architecture. I love teaching. So why don't I just take people on my tours? And that's when it started, 2018. I did Spain and Portugal, and China, as well as domestically, Sydney and Brisbane.
Wow.
We did that for 2 years. And then 2020, Andrew said, hey, let's make YouTube videos. Because I was starting to move away from photos, because I used to always just take photos, and my friends said, they look like stock photos. They didn't think there was actually part of being in that space. Like, you took that. So yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But, okay, maybe I need to do videos and give it a bit more life. And so that's when I learned a little bit of video making, and that's when we started. And the whole idea was that we'll be big, and we'll get sponsors, and we get paid to travel and make more content. We're still looking for sponsors. We haven't got any. But it's the social media is getting pretty big now, so that's good.
So I'm curious, when you went on the tours just yourself, like how long were those trips that you were making, and how many buildings were you seeing in those trips?
A lot. I remember the Spain one. I was doing like hundreds of them in like 3 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
And I just planned. But then again, I go to places that just got the most bang for the buck. They're just like, yep, there's that one. Go over there. There's a few more. So it's always been places that you can find a lot of really good work quite quickly.
So back at that time, were you researching and finding out a bunch of information, about the buildings before you went?
Yeah.
So you knew like all the history and all the details and things?
Well, probably not all the history, but enough to know, I need to go see that.
Interesting.
Part of the problem is, I think, with architecture tourism is that you will find a lot of maps, you will find a lot of places and websites and things with all these pins on like places to go and see. The problem is curation. Which one do you choose to go and see?
Yeah.
So the research is more just looking through the pictures and plans and sections and just really making a call. Like, would I cross town to see this? Would I cross the world to see this? And trying to see if there are lessons to be learned from each one. And most importantly, that there are lessons to be learned. So then that's the curation part, as opposed to just anything and everything. Because you can't cover everything.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So you could make like a Michelin guidebook of architecture. No, but actually that would be super useful, because you're right. Like, it takes a lot of time and research to find the right things to see.
You just have to book the tour and go on the tour.
I definitely am going to look into it, because I think that's pretty awesome.
We travel on occasion, not as much as we want to. Of course.
You went to Switzerland recently, didn't you?
We did. Yeah. And of course, when we're on vacation or traveling, we always end up seeing architecture, because
what else is there?
That's what we want to do.
Like laying on the beach for a week doesn't sound exciting to us.
We would get too antsy. Where's the buildings? But we probably should do more preparation or research before we go and see any of these buildings. That's one of the things that doesn't quite happen. And the downside of not doing any, preparation is that even in just an experience a city, if you don't have a tour guide, you don't come to appreciate it, because you don't understand what you're looking at beyond just kind of the aesthetics and you being there. But the filtering you were mentioning made me think of, we had visited Japan a number of years ago, and we had a day to kill. So we were like, okay, let's find some Tadao Ando buildings to go see. And this was like all super last minute, not planned at all. And so we found one, I think it was in Osaka, a very famous small house. That's, of course, the front's all concrete. No, well, that too. But this house, we're like, okay, let's go to Osaka to see this house. And it took like forever to get there, because you wouldn't know how to get there. We arrive, of course, it's a private residence. It's a small concrete facade that's dated, so it's kind of old and a little bit broken down. And then we stood there for about 30 seconds and left, because there was nothing to do or to learn. And there was nothing to see, because it's a house, it's private, and there's just a concrete facade. And I remember standing outside.
Doorway. That's Azuma House, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. And just thinking, this was like it's cool to see it, but this was dumb. Like we should have planned this out a little bit more.
That's not on my list.
Yeah.
I know where it is, but it's not on my list. Again, I think the same thing. Like, what am I going to get out of that?
Not a whole lot. I can say from first-person experience. So
you can get a selfie.
Yeah, a selfie. We're not big selfie people either, so we're we're there for 10 seconds.
That was a joke.
Yeah. But so for these tours, though, I mean, once it evolved to having a group of people on them, that's quite the administrative ordeal to do, to plan it, to book tickets, to organize the whole thing. Did you know that you wanted to get to that point with Archimarathon, or did you roll into it, or do you sometimes think like this is too much headache to put up with all this, being a guide?
Well, I mean, I used to love traveling by myself, so but again, that's exactly what I would do for myself, like just trying to find the best value for money place, things, and right in the middle of the action where I stay, and yeah, I think it's nice to share now. I've been on a few now. It's been 5 years or more. No, more than that. And it's just great conversations that we have with others. Because, Andrew and I, we cold read basically half the time. We just look at the buildings and we break it down in the way how we see it. And we talk about the important things that we see. I mean, that's the same as all our videos. It's a lot of times just cold read. Like, oh, here's the thing. There's some background we know. You can find facts and figures and things on Instagram, on Wikipedia, and other websites. So a lot of tour guides tour guide in a lot of countries are licensed. They have to go through exams and so that they can spit out the facts and figures correctly.
Wow.
We're not. I'm not a tour guide, I'm tour leader or tour curator. So we go there and then we read the design and we talk about what's worthwhile and what lessons we can get from buildings, and what's clever about it, what's great about it, and that's what we do. So it's quite different from just giving the facts and figures. We may have some kind of backgrounds like, well, this particular architect, this is what they do, this is where they're from, this is some of the work and kind of thinking they have.
Can you tell us a bit more about maybe like your next tour that's upcoming? Like, how many people are joining the tour? Like, who are they? Are they mostly students, architects, non-architects?
So we had this year, it's been the most diverse this year. We had, especially Japan tour, we had people from United States, Australia, of course, New Zealand, then Bahrain, UAE.
Wow.
Hong Kong, Philippines, and people who are just completely not in architecture. They're just enthusiasts.
Interesting.
So that's really, it's really great to see. And the conversation is just as strong because we make sure there is that conversation that happens end of each day. In fact, it's just as important as just seeing the building. So it's a great way for them to memorize the things, but also just to have a sort of group debriefing on what we've seen to date every time. And and again, it surprises me how articulated a lot of the non-architects are actually about buildings and the way of seeing. And the students get better at it in terms of communicating and having ability to talk about architecture by actually physically visiting and seeing and touching buildings.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Have you done one in Switzerland?
No, I have thought of it. In fact, this year I was going to do Germany.
Oh,
but then I looked at all the prices and booking of accommodations. Like, why is it so expensive?
The Olympics.
It was the Euro Cup.
Yeah.
So that's when I looked at the prices. It was cheaper in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland's not cheap.
No, it's not.
Yeah, no, that's
exactly.
Correct.
So we went to Scandinavia because we're going to do Finland anyway. So Finland and Scandinavia. So there were two different tours, sort of back to back.
Do you have like a maximum number of people that can join those tours?
Well, we tried this time. We've probably gone the max that we've tried in the international multi-day tour. We've got up to 17 of us, including Andrew and I. That is, that was a bit too big, so I think we're going to limit down to just 14.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Just a sweet spot, I think, in terms of just the group dynamics, how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of fun. Are there any other aspects to Archimarathon that we're not aware of? You have the studio, you have the tours.
Yeah, well, the videos.
The videos, of course.
Which relates, again, it's all part of the story of, reading buildings and learning from it. Apart from some of the ones that it's about education, specifically in terms of for students. The buildings we talk about, we have a policy of no negativity.
Mm.
So I think we have a different policy. I feel like we're often way too negative.
To be negative.
I know.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to be negative, and I think we as a profession is already bad enough as it is in terms of how the public understands and sees us. So why? And we are very good at just destroying each other, I think.
Yeah.
And so we have a policy of just celebrate the good stuff. It gets difficult sometimes. You try not to be negative, and we just don't look at that stuff. But we talk about the good stuff.
Yeah.
I think the public needs to know what architects do. Why is it merit? Why is it good? And so that's a policy we have.
So
to make sure that people understand as much as we can, to try to communicate about architecture in a simple language, and why is it great? Why is it worthwhile?
Yeah, why is it worthwhile? So that particular angle of communicating things in the way you just described, but with the intention also of getting a certain message across to the general public, non-architects, people who are not part of the architecture cult yet. Did that as a mission come around once the video started, or was that something you had in the back of your mind kind of brewing?
It was pretty much when Andrew and I had said, let's make YouTube videos, and said, let's not make those ones. The architecture ones tend to be pretty arty and slow, and so let's not do that.
Yeah.
We look at other videos that are on certain topics, and car ones that are we have no interest in cars, but somehow they make it entertaining. That you just end up like Top Gear, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to like cars to watch Top Gear and then you go, that was fun. It's like, I learned something about cars as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we imagined it was going to be. Still kind of, I hope we're trying to do that.
I mean, I think it's a good goal to set. And we do it in very different ways from you guys, but one of the underlying ideas behind what we're doing now with the show is to talk to people or to talk to an audience that's not just architects, to kind of, peek behind the curtain or break down the walls or whatever it might be. What was it like starting video, and then how has it evolved since 2020?
I don't think it's evolved that much. I think I got probably a little bit better at editing now. The short form stuff has really informed how I do things, I think. We got paid by TikTok a couple of years ago to make short form videos, because they just got sick of they're trying to get away from the lip syncing and the dancing videos. So they got a whole bunch of educational, this is Australia and New Zealand, creators from YouTube to make short form videos specifically for TikTok.
Interesting.
So we did some. It's like any video that's more than 10 seconds. Like, okay. And we made a whole bunch of them, and in past 9 weeks we were able to put it on Instagram, and we put it on Instagram. That does a lot better. So I think that has changed the way I edit. And also, finally after COVID, we were able to travel and make videos.
Mm-hmm.
And travel. And then I realized how hard it is to try to run a tour, lead a tour, and trying to film at the same time.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to work out that process at the moment. And for me to film the vertical short form stuff and edit it is much easier than YouTube. YouTube is a different game. I think people expect certain audio level and qualities, and this stuff is quick.
Yeah. So when you're,
I mean, all the YouTube is filmed with this anyways. Whether you do this or this.
yeah. So this is kind of the nerding out aspect. So when you're out on tour, is there someone with you helping you record the stuff, or just the two of you?
Wow, that's a lot of work. Yeah.
And so while the tour group is exploring, they're building on their own, you guys find some time to just shoot some stuff?
We try to, yeah. Well, it hasn't really happened. YouTube takes longer. So the short form stuff I can just do pretty quickly. I can chop it all together. I can do some sound. I just have to show like, we're here, and then cut. It's just like shots. And audio, just like you can with audio, you can just chop it. It sounds very succinct. 90 seconds, just cram it right down, and then just footage.
That's impressive.
There's a lot of, we tried to film both of us talking at the same time, so just doing that, but it didn't work. So it just ended up like me pointing at Andrew, and I'll be like going, oh yeah, and then it's that.
Yeah.
You need a little paper silhouette of yourself that you can just stick in front of the iPhone just so it looks like you're on the camera too.
Do you guys have an editor, or do you do the editing yourself?
I do the editing myself.
Wow. Okay.
That's wow.
That's time intensive. We as we were talking before the show, I think we used to do a lot of all the editing at early days.
Oh.
It's very time consuming. We also, like you were talking about the short form format of content. It's something that is obviously popular now. It has been popular for the last X number of years. It's something we struggle with because our deal is an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation. And sometimes it's really hard to cut things down to, I mean, if I can hit 60 seconds, I'm super thrilled. It's just hard. And also because I ramble, so it takes me quite some time to get to what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know how hard it is. But the good thing is it's audio. Then if you just cut with footage, you can just chop them all together and sound like it's just the same sentence. So I sometimes doctor quite a bit of words together and it sounds normal.
Nice. So how many tours are you able to do a year? And you have Archimarathon Studio. This must keep you busy full time between all these things.
It is, yeah. Very, very busy. Bit burnt out. And I need to go look for sponsors at the same time somehow.
Yeah.
Tours, I've got I announced 3 for next year at the moment, which is Japan, the same Japan one in January that we did, and then possibly Germany and or Netherlands in June, July, and then another one in September back to Japan, but because the Osaka Expo is next year.
Ooh.
And it finishes in October. So September is probably a good time when it's not too hot and it's not too crazy like the Sakura season. To go back, and it's more a different version. It's a bit more, I call it the deep cuts and B-sides. So it's a bit more, people have been to Japan already and let's go look for things that's a bit harder to get to than just, going down Otome Sando and it's like,
Yeah.
all that stuff you can see by yourself anyway.
Yeah.
I love it. 14 people. It's not enough though. It's gonna be tough for people to get in there with that count. You have to find a way to expand.
We make sure we're trying to make sure there's a good mix of practitioners, enthusiasts and students as well. So that's always quite amazing just to see that mix, and also how well the practitioners get on with the students and students learning to let go and just to be part of the group.
So do people have to apply and you review their application to be part of the tour, or can they just book it and you find out who they are the day of?
Yeah, they have to apply.
Oh,
and so we're trying to make sure that there's a good mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm very curious because you've probably been to like so many different places and countries. Is there a city, a place, a country that kind of like stands out for you right now in terms of what you see the more recent architecture being? Like, is there a place that nobody knows about that's not on the touristy books that maybe, there is a lot of good stuff happening in terms of construction, design, and architecture?
I think every country, in Europe's easy because it's just easy to get around. There's a lot of things to see. Recently, we went to Aarhus. I really like Aarhus. That was an interesting city, second largest city in Denmark. I don't know. I picked Spain and Portugal because at the very start, because there's such diversity and from historical and a layering of history and also contemporary work, really cutting edge contemporary work in Spain, and good food, and not too expensive.
Yeah.
And then China, of course, much harder to get around without DD and the app system, which is now a bit easier now. They finally opened up to be able to use foreign cards and things like that. But China, again, there's great food. Food's part of the story, and buildings to see that are, I think most people don't know about. I mean, you probably see them on Art Daily or whatever, but I think most people just never get to them. But when you get to them, the work there is phenomenal.
That is one of the strange things about being an architect, is that the thing that you work so hard on, the craft of architecture, it takes a lot of time, and I think a lot of architects aren't able to. They for sure have not seen all the buildings you have, but they aren't even able to get to a fraction of that because it's expensive to travel, et cetera, But that would really be, actually, per your story, a worthwhile chunk of education just to spend time just to see all of these buildings. And it's kind of odd that I think a lot of practicing architects, they don't have that opportunity. I mean, there's good reasons for it being challenging, of course.
Well, yeah, cost is one thing. That's why I try to make sure you get the most out of that time.
Yeah.
And the things you see, and it's really reinvigorating just to instead of just head down, bump up, and thumbs up working all the time, you get to revisit and sort of remind yourself what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
And I equate that to chefs. I always talk about architecture just like food.
Yeah.
And I use the same analogy that we use the same ingredients. We have the same access to the same ingredients as you would with building materials. And most people can make something edible, but what makes it special, something that you remember, that scene in Ratatouille, like the food critic. It's just a simple Ratatouille dish, and it was amazing. So I think that's like architecture. And so we as chefs, we don't build anything. We kind of write the cookbook, I guess, in some ways. We don't physically build. We don't physically cook. But also we need to go and you need to go out and eat.
Yeah.
To see, if you're a chef, you're not just working. You shouldn't just be working all the time. You should just go and hopefully you enjoy food. That's the reason why you get into cooking in the first place. And same as architecture, that's why you need to go and remind yourself, like, just go and feast on buildings.
I love it. Now I'm hungry for buildings.
Are you planning to do any tour in the United States?
There have been questions about that. If you can help me find some insurance company who will help me to cover insurance, because the North America, like the Lloyd's of London, just would not cover North America at the moment. So.
Oh, interesting.
The U.S. is great. It's also huge, though. It takes a lot of time to get from one place to the next.
Well, it'll be focused. I could imagine something on the New England, East Coast down to New York.
Yeah.
Boston, New York.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. We always have a couple final questions, which is, one is your favorite building, but prior to that one, has there been any buildings that were a surprise when you saw them in person, that they were different from what you expected, different from the photographs? Many. Yeah.
In both ways, from photographs being really shit, and then to completely opposite. It's like much better than I expected. But there are many. So I would choose the one that first did it for me, and that was when I was a student. I hated the pictures of La Tourette.
Huh. Interesting.
It just looked like this depressing, brutalist school You know, I come from Hong Kong. That's what it kind of looked like. It's like, oh, I didn't understand it. I didn't give it a chance. When, oh, what's this thing? You know, there were always sort of crummy black and white photos that were just sitting in the corridors in the architecture building. Yeah. Then, of course, you know, went there and stayed there, and then I realized it's, this is magical and something that's you don't understand until you've been there. I think that's the same as a lot of Le Corbusier's buildings. You really need to go to see them to understand. You know, Marseille, Unité. Same thing, you know, it looked like just some kind of block of commission housing if you for the untrained eye. And then when you go stay there, it's like this is the most beautiful, peaceful place to hang out. So.
For the listeners, so what are some of the things about La Tourette or other Corbusier's works that are things that you experienced in person but are not captured in plans and photographs, particularly old black and white photographs? There's
a lot of subtle moves, I think. You know, the way he would, they become little lessons in themselves, and how I would frame something with the structure and and then also the way you move through the spaces, and also the texture, just something and the composition of materials is something that you don't really get. There's a certain rawness to it. At the same time, it's like, it's kind of forgiving. Don't need to be super high finished.
Yeah, that's a interesting observation. We, as you said, we were in Switzerland. One of the buildings we saw was his pavilion in Zurich, which was lovely. And my feeling with that building and a lot of his work is that he packs in a lot of interesting details, like small details, but also moves and gestures that you just don't see in the handful of photographs, you know, that are out there of whatever project it is.
And I could see how his projects are so very hard to photograph in a way that it would give it justice, you know, because it's not so much that like his buildings are pretty severe when you look at photographs. Like you said, like it looks kind of like this, you know, very intense structure, kind of cold and inhumane, right? But when you're in there, it feels completely different. And maybe it has to do with the nature of like what photography is and what video is, and you know, actually what it means to experience a space rather than just looking at a framed view of it. I'm French. I studied architecture in Paris, and when I was a student, Le Corbusier was never really an architect that was praised by any of our teachers.
Really?
Weirdly. And I feel like now that I've experienced some of his building, I think like maybe he was misunderstood in some ways. Because I do see...
Well, it's a reaction against him too, I think, probably around that time.
Yeah, I think so. But I've...
Oh, what's this?
You would know this. No?
That is a lovely building, though.
The brutalist Algerian French architect. Apparently he's quite influential. No?
I do not know that. No, I have to write it down.
He did the Musée Picasso.
Oh, I love the Musée Picasso.
Yeah, so that was him. That was one of his last projects.
Oh, very cool.
That's when I bought this book.
I don't think I've been to that museum.
It's pretty small, but it's
fabulous.
No, I think I took you there.
Oh, I have to go back.
I think I took you there.
I have to go back.
It's a bit Scarpa-like in its kind of quirkiness, and it works really well with Picasso's work and the old building that it fits into.
Oh, I love it. That's an interesting thing. The last few architects that we're talking about, circling back, that is one of the things that is oftentimes missed when the program approach to architecture is not carried through to like the design level of execution. There's a lot of kind of, I guess, odd or different things that happen in Scarpa's projects. The architect you just mentioned, Corbusier, and a lot of people from kind of that time. And there are ones that do it now for sure, but some of the subtlety of the arts of architecture is just, I think there was a generation, and maybe continues to be a generation of younger architects that just gloss over all of that with kind of bigness. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think Corbusier, Latourette was the one that I learned about, how do you place the column? What is, you can enclose any way you like. So where he puts the wall and where he puts the column and how that frames the space. That was the turning point for me to realize, structure is not just something to just hold up a building. It's actually a spatial device.
Yeah. Not something you just shove in there, make it work, engineer. The last question, of course, is what is your favorite building?
That changes all the time.
Fair enough.
Depends on the mood, I think. It's become a bit that way. It's a bit like food. Suddenly I feel like this. Look, for a long time, I always used to say Ronchamp because going now around circle, because it was the first one that we've been explained to. Having said that, though, I think of his three churches, I think Firminy is probably more interesting because it's a much tougher environment and a much tougher program. But yeah, Ronchamp is still up there as one of my favorites. It is kind of, the more I know it, the more you kind of realize it's actually quite bitsy. It's quite a few things going on at the same time that seems a bit unrelated. But I still got a soft spot for it. But unfortunately, churches tends to be up there as the top because that's what they're designed for. They're designed to plug your heartstrings. Yeah. They've been doing that for thousands of years. So they are unfairly so that they are usually some of the tops because they just do that emotionally as opposed to a school or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. As opposed to a hospital. The Firminy Chapel is great. We had visited that one. I think you were there as well. Yeah. It's the, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of not trapezoidal, sort of like a cone shape, right? Kind of like. And
then the space underneath, the community center sort of exhibition space underneath as well.
Yep. And or maybe you weren't there.
I don't think I was there. I would know if I had been there.
On the back of the, I think it's the altar, there are like punched holes, which I think relate to the constellations or something, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a lovely chapel, as you would expect. It's awesome. This has been a lot of fun. Now now I have to go see some architecture.
Apply to the tour. Yeah, I think
let's skip dinner and do architecture instead. Thanks so much for making the time. For the listeners, this is actually on a weekend, so like extra credit to you for being a guest on the weekend. This was a lot of fun, and hearing about what you're doing.
Fun. Thank you.
Appreciate what you're doing as well. I think it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.